All right, we're back and we're going to talk about the job characteristics model. So here we have Hackman and Oldham, and I'm sure they're drawing their model right there. We're seeing a picture of it. So in this job characteristics model, you have core job dimensions that can contribute to or affect critical psychological states, which then can lead to or affect personal and work outcomes. Don't worry, it's going to get more complicated, so bear with me. So what are the core job dimensions? Skill, variety, task identity, and task significance are all kind of talking about like what you do, right? Like what you're doing all day physically. Autonomy, that word means, how much control you have over your own work day, what you're doing, how you do it, like that, timing of things. And then feedback refers to how what this response is to your output. Do you get positives, negatives? Nothing is bad. Skinner says that's the best way to punish someone is to just ignore what they do. That is the most punishing thing you can do. So hopefully if you're ever in a situation where you are leading other people, you will give them feedback because silence is terrible. All right. Sorry, little digression. All right. Now, critical psychological states would be things like experiencing the meaningfulness of the work, experiencing responsibility for the outcomes of the work. And they put it in past tense because what they're trying to say is whether the person kind of feels like their work is meaningful. Do they feel like they have responsibility for the outcomes of their work? And then do they have knowledge of what happens after they've done the work? Sometimes you put stuff out into the ether. Yeah, I've completed my assignment and no one ever tells you how it worked out, which is kind of like ignoring them. And then we have at the bottom there, growth needs strength, which is sort of a measure of how much that person is trying to grow, how much they feel the need to be growing. All right, and then on the third column, we have under personal and work outcomes, we have high internal motivation, high quality of work performance, high satisfaction with the work, and low absenteeism and turnover. So these would be all positive personal and work outcomes. Of course, you could flip them all and you could have negative things, but this model is designed to kind of show you how things flow. And so what they predict is that skill variety, task identity, and task significance flows into experience meaningfulness of the work, which then tends to flow into high internal motivation, high quality of work performance predominantly. Then you have autonomy flowing into experience responsibility for outcomes of the work, and it tends to flow into satisfaction and quality of work performance. Feedback flows into knowledge of results, which then tends to contribute to high internal motivation, high quality of work performance, high satisfaction with the work, and low absenteeism and turnover. Growth, having a high growth need, if it's a strong need to grow, that need is what we call an intervening variable on both sides. So it intervenes between the core job dimensions and the critical psychological states, and between critical psychological states and personal and work outcomes. So how much the person wants to grow and develop is sort of a moderator for how these different factors influence each other and how the flow may go. So basically, it's considered a theory of intrinsic motivation because it emphasizes personal mastery and control. Whenever you see words like autonomy, mastery, affiliation, when you see words like that, you know that they're getting at intrinsic motivators, things that are inside of you where you as an individual are motivated by that factor. So if you're a person who's high on the need for autonomy, that's going to have a bigger influence on your work output than if you are a person who's not as high on that, right? So these theorists were arguing that autonomy is sort of a factor in every job that may impact all of us in sort of different ways. Like if you have a high autonomy job and you experience a sense that you are responsible for the outcomes of the work, and you don't like that, you are not high on the need for autonomy. You would rather have somebody helping to direct and control. This may be experienced as negative for you. If you are high in the need for autonomy, this is probably going to feel good. You're going to like that you have personal responsibility. And so there's got to be that match between, the core job dimensions and then the person's general, approach to the world, that growth need. So some other intrinsic motivation theories, DC and Ryan, speaking of that growth need stuff. Okay, just full disclosure, whenever I do research, I have just such a tendency to slip in self-determination theory in everything that I study. So I'm super biased right now as I'm talking about DC and Ryan. Because self-determination theory argues that the humans have three basic needs: the need for competence, the need for autonomy, and the need for relatedness. Now, some people have added a fourth one, mastery, and so and they mix and match. And there's another theory that has four. But the basic idea here is that these are intrinsic. They are in us to different degrees. And some of us are more motivated by trying to show our competence and trying to develop our competence. Some of us are more motivated by autonomy and wanting to be in control of things. Some of us are more motivated by relatedness, where we want to be, getting along with our peers and things like that. And, some of us are like moderate on all three. Some of us are like high on one and lower on two. Some are two are high and one is low. Like, we vary on these things. And so what DC and Ryan are arguing is that wherever you are on these needs will help to determine how satisfied you are with your situation, and whether that's work or life or other things. And so, so these three things are what they mean by intrinsic motivation, that these are the three things that make up intrinsic motivation. Now, relatedness sounds a lot like Maslow's belongingness, doesn't it? Right? There isn't a lot of overlap with other things, though. Maybe esteem would be in the competence. Maybe autonomy falls into competence. It's not really clear. They weren't trying to line up with Maslow, but they were trying to make the argument that these individual motivations can have an impact on how satisfied or motivated a person is, right? Working towards goals and stuff. One thing to keep in mind is that that we have to avoid, as potential employers or teachers, things like that, what's called the over-justification effect, where if you have a person who already knows their competence and they already know and enjoy doing what they're doing, they're very intrinsically motivated towards doing that thing. If you start to reward them for something that they were intrinsically doing, that they naturally wanted to do, you can actually reduce their motivation. You can reduce their intrinsic motivation by substituting an extrinsic motivator. I'll give you an example. Maybe some of you experienced this when you were kids, where you were supposed to keep track of how many minutes in the evening you read. And if you got to enough minutes over the school year, you got to go to the end of the year pizza party to reward you for being such a diligent reader. When my daughter was in first grade, we had the opportunity to sign her up for that. And I was like, that kid loved to read already. Like, it was death to get her to stop reading and eat her dinner or do anything other than read. In fact, when she was little, a really effective punishment was to take her book away. So she'd have to work it back. So she loved to read as a little kid, and she came into first grade already reading at a third grade level. I did not teach her. Do not think I'm bragging. I'm just saying this crazy kid taught herself how to read and was reading like a crazy person and loved it. And so I didn't sign her up for it because I worried about over-justification. And she didn't even know what was going on. I mean, she could read, but she didn't know what was going on in the world. So she had no idea other people were doing things. And so she found out at the end of the school year when she wasn't eligible to go to the pizza party. And she goes, I read way more minutes than that. And I was like, yeah, but I didn't want you to be like filling out the form and noticing that somebody was paying attention to how much you were reading and then make you start to feel like it was a job. Where now you have to read. You're not doing it because you love it. You're doing it because you have to. Well, I don't know how many years, but I think if we called her right now, she's probably still mad at me. And that story is 25 years old. So I have a feeling she's still mad that I didn't sign her up for that. But I mean, you can kind of see my logic, right? Like I said, I'm very biased towards the DC and Ryan model anyway, but I definitely thought I don't want to ruin this kid's natural interest in reading by over justifying it. And that is something to be concerned about. So if you have somebody who's already super motivated towards something, you don't want to accidentally make it an extrinsic motivation where they're now doing it because you were giving them something for it. And that's something that came out of DC and Ryan. All right. Cognitive choice theories. So, like I said before, people are active decision makers and they strive to be rational in choosing what to do and how much effort to exert and stuff like that. Okay. There are two main theories that fall under the cognitive choice theory. One is called equity theory and one is called expectancy theory. So let's jump in with equity theory. Adams came up with this in 1963, and he argued that individuals' perception of fairness of their treatment compared to others will affect their motivation. We've kind of talked about this a little bit in class before, but one of the things that he argued is that people naturally compare themselves with others. We start doing that when we're little kids. We start looking around and seeing what is everybody else doing, what is everybody else getting. We start comparing ourselves with others. So if we look around and we see somebody else who's doing basically what we're doing and they're getting what we're getting, we'll call that equity. We are more motivated to maintain the current situation than if we were to look over at our peer and they're, let's say, doing less, or they're doing it not as well as we're doing it or something like that, but they're getting the same outcome as we are. We experience that as inequity, and we have now a motivation to try to reduce the inequity. We want to make it fair again. And so one thing we have under our control in that situation is to change the inputs. I'm not going to work so hard. Change the outcomes, where it's like, you can tell me all the things you want, but I'm going to only give you back what I'm willing to give back to you, right? Altering the perception of self. So we might criticize ourselves and say, well, maybe I didn't know it, but maybe I'm not doing as good a work as my peer is. Maybe they're getting paid more because they are doing more that I don't know about and they're a better person and I'm kind of a loser and bad thoughts might come. Maybe we change our opinion of the other, and this may cause us to invoke stereotypes and blame their sex or their race or some other thing that would make us think, okay, that they're being favored because of those things. And so maybe we are going to invoke stereotypes. Another thing we can do to reduce inequity, our feelings of inequity, would be to stop comparing ourselves to that person and maybe compare ourselves to somebody else. And that might make us feel a little bit better. Maybe we're doing better than somebody else. And so, okay, stop looking at that person. Let's look at that person. I feel better. And then, of course, the last and probably worst, most drastic thing to do would be to leave the situation. This isn't fair. I'm getting out of here, right? And, I've already kind of beaten my little story about, organizations invest a lot in their employees. And so when you have a disgruntled employee who leaves, it can be costly to the organization. They don't want their employees to leave like that necessarily. Unless they really are not doing very good work and that's why they're getting the bad outcome and they just think they're doing a fine job. So there have been some newer concepts that have come along based on this equity theory. Everybody sort of like builds on theories that have come before. And so equity sensitivity is one concept and the other is organizational justice. Equity sensitivity says that people vary on how sensitive they are to equity issues. Some people are very sensitive and they notice any little like slight appearance that there might be inequity, and they oftentimes like really internalize it and feel really bad about it. Other people don't notice, even if they are being treated badly, even if they in that situation are the one who's getting less, they may not even notice, or they may feel in their minds that it's justifiable and they don't think anything about it. And so people vary on that. And so people who take it in stride should not judge people who are more sensitive, or vice versa, because people are different on those things. People vary. And they've got lots of concrete data that shows people vary on how sensitive they are to that. On organizational justice, there are a lot of concepts that have sort of cascaded from that. Distributive justice, which is kind of getting at like distribution of perks, things like that. Procedural justice, like the fairness of the rules and how they're applied. Interactional justice, and that could be interpersonal. So like how, who has access to talk to the boss, or who's allowed to chit chat on their cell phone where other people aren't. That's an interpersonal justice one also. And then informational, like how come some people have access to information within the organization, other people are deprived and they get to find out, at the last minute or something. So all of these are sort of like things that have come down out of organizational justice as a concept. All right. Seems like a good time to stop. We'll come back in the next video and we'll talk about expectancy theory. And look at who our author is. I just had to put his first name in case you thought I was making up his last name. Vroom! All right, we'll talk about Vroom in the next one.